Hello? Is anyone home? Knock, knock. Annie turned quickly toward the door, her eyes wide. Grandma, someone's there. Before Martha could respond, Annie had already slid off her chair and hurried across the worn carpet. The porch light outside cast a faint glow through the frosted glass, revealing the shadow of someone small standing just beyond the door. Annie reached up, unlocked it, and slowly pulled it open. A little boy stood there. He looked about 5 years old, maybe younger. Annie blinked in surprise. "Who are you?" she asked gently. "Why are you knocking on our door this late?" The boy swallowed, his voice trembling. "My name is Oliver." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the dark street behind him. I got lost." "Lost?" Annie repeated softly. Oliver nodded quickly. "I was playing in the park," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't realize it was getting dark. And then I couldn't find my way back." He lifted a small phone in his hand. "My phone ran out of battery," he added. "I tried to call my dad, but it died." He looked down at it, then back at Annie. "I saw your house light still on," he said quietly. "Can I stay here for a little while? Just until I can charge my phone?" Then, almost shyly, he placed his hand over his stomach and rubbed it. "I'm kind of hungry too." The simple honesty in his voice made Annie's chest tighten. Behind her, guessing her, Martha's voice rang out. "Annie." The little girl turned. Her grandmother stood a few steps away now, her expression no longer soft, but alert, protective. "Step back from the door, honey," Martha said. Annie hesitated. "But Grandma..." "He's just a kid." Martha moved closer, her eyes carefully studying the boy. "I've seen this before," she said quietly. "Kids knocking late at night, saying they're lost." She folded her arms. "Sometimes they're not alone." Annie frowned. "What do you mean?" Martha's voice lowered. "Sometimes people send children ahead to see who opens the door." The wind outside picked up again, rattling the loose frame of the porch. "There were cases like that years ago," Martha continued. "Children pretending, houses getting robbed." Oliver's eyes widened. "I'm not pretending," he said quickly. "I promise." His voice cracked. "I just didn't know where else to go." He held up his dead phone again. "I can't call my dad, and I don't know the way home." Silence settled between them. Annie looked at him, really looked. She turned back to her grandmother, her voice soft but determined. "Grandma, please." Martha didn't answer right away. "Please let him come in," Annie continued, stepping closer to her. "He just needs to charge his phone. Then he can call his dad." Martha sighed, her shoulders heavy with years of caution and experience. "Annie, you don't understand." "I do," Annie interrupted gently. "You always say we should help people." Martha looked at her. "You said kindness matters," Annie added, "even when it's hard." That made Martha pause. She glanced at the boy again. He stood there quietly, not moving, as if afraid even the smallest step might send him away. Martha exhaled slowly. Life had taught her to be careful, but it had also taught her something else. She stepped forward. "All right," she said at last, her voice firm but no longer cold. "You can come in." Oliver's face lit up with relief. "But listen carefully," Martha added, raising a finger slightly. "You stay where I can see you, and no wandering around. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Oliver said quickly. He stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him instantly. The smell of soup filled the room. Annie closed the door behind him and smiled. "Come on," she said. "You can sit here." She pulled out a chair at the table. Oliver sat down slowly, still looking a little unsure, but far less frightened than before. Martha moved toward the counter, watching him from the corner of her eye. "You said your name is Oliver?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "And your father knows you're missing?" Oliver shook his head. "He doesn't yet," he said quietly. "That's why I need to charge my phone." Annie immediately turned toward the wall outlet. "I have a charger," she said. She hurried over, unplugged the old radio for a moment, and handed the cable to Oliver. "Here," she said proudly. Oliver plugged in his phone. The screen stayed black for a few seconds. Then, a small light flickered. "Charging." Oliver let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he whispered. Annie grinned. "No problem." Martha ladled soup into a bowl and placed it gently in front of the boy. "Eat," she said. "Food first, worry later." Oliver picked up the spoon with both hands. The warmth of the bowl seemed to travel straight through him. As he took the first bite, Annie watched him carefully. Two children, from two completely different worlds, sitting at the same small table. Outside, the night stretched quietly across the city, and far away, a father was searching desperately for his lost son, unaware that in a modest little house, under a flickering kitchen light, a simple act of kindness had already begun to change everything. Oliver didn't stop eating until the bowl was empty. Annie watched him the whole time, her chin resting in her hands, elbows on the table. There was something almost fascinating about the way he ate, quick, careful, like he didn't quite believe the food was really his. Martha noticed it too. "Honey," she said gently, reaching for the pot again. "Slow down. There's plenty more." Oliver hesitated, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Really?" Martha gave a small nod. "We don't let anyone leave this house hungry." That seemed to settle something deep inside him. His shoulders loosened just a little, and for the first time since he stepped through the door, he looked like a child instead of someone trying very hard not to be afraid. Annie smiled. "Told you," she said. Oliver gave a small, shy smile back. On the table beside him, the phone continued charging. The faint glow of the screen reflected in his eyes as he glanced at it every few seconds, as if afraid it might stop working again. Martha leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching the two children. "So, Oliver," she said, her voice calm but observant, "what does your father do?" Oliver wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve before answering. "He works a lot," he said simply. Annie tilted her head. "What kind of work?" Oliver shrugged. "Big stuff, I guess." Martha raised an eyebrow slightly at that, but didn't press further. "Big stuff usually keeps a man busy," she said. Oliver nodded, then looked back at the phone again. The battery icon flickered. 12%. He let out a small breath. "Almost there," he whispered. Annie leaned closer. "You really don't know your way home?" she asked. Oliver shook his head. "Everything looks different at night," he said. "And I wasn't paying attention earlier." Annie nodded slowly. "I got lost once," she admitted. "At the grocery store." Oliver's eyes widened. "What happened?" Annie said matter-of-factly. "Then Grandma found me." Martha chuckled softly from the counter. "And she hasn't wandered off since." "I have too," Annie protested, though her smile betrayed her. Oliver let out a quiet laugh. It was the first real sound of relief in the room. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window before disappearing into the dark. Martha's eyes followed the light for a moment. Then she looked back at Oliver. "You said your father doesn't know where you are," she said. Oliver's smile faded slightly. "He's probably really worried," he admitted. Martha nodded. "Then the sooner you call him, the better." The phone buzzed softly. Oliver jumped slightly and looked down. Battery, 25%. The screen lit up fully now, revealing a clean interface and a long list of missed calls. Annie leaned in. "That's a lot of calls," she said. Oliver's face paled. "He's definitely looking for me." Martha stepped closer, her expression softening again. "Go ahead, child," she said. "Call him." Oliver nodded quickly. His small fingers trembled as he tapped the screen and selected a contact labeled simply, "Dad." The phone rang once, twice. Then, a voice answered immediately. "Oliver?" The change in Oliver was instant. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking with relief. If this moment touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share where you are watching from in the comments. Your support helps stories like this reach more people. And if you believe in kindness and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. On the other end, the man's voice cracked. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Oliver said quickly. "I got lost, but I'm safe now." Annie and Martha exchanged a glance. Even through the phone, the urgency in the man's voice was unmistakable. "Put someone on the line," the man said. "Who are you with?" Oliver looked up at Martha, unsure. Martha stepped forward and gently took the phone. "This is Martha Carter," she said calmly. "He's safe in my home." There was a brief pause. Then the man spoke again, slower now, but still carrying tension beneath every word. "Ma'am, thank you. Thank you for taking him in." Martha nodded, though he couldn't see her. Any decent person would do the same. "I'm on my way," the man said. "Can you give me your address?" Martha did, carefully, clearly. She had given that address for decades to neighbors, delivery drivers, friends. But tonight, it felt different. When she finished, the man didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went silent. Martha handed the phone back to Oliver. "He's coming," she said. Oliver nodded, clutching the phone tightly. Annie grinned. "See? I told you everything would be okay." Oliver looked at her, something warm settling in his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You did." Martha moved back toward the stove, stirring the soup absent-mindedly. But her mind wasn't on the pot anymore. 20 minutes. She glanced toward the window again. Something about the man's voice lingered in her thoughts. Not just worry. The kind of voice that people listened to. She had heard voices like that before, long ago. Outside, the street remained quiet. Annie slid off her chair and walked over to the window, peeking through the curtain. "What are you looking for?" Martha asked. "Nothing," Annie said. "Just wondering what his dad looks like." Oliver gave a small smile. "He's tall," he said. "That's helpful," Annie replied, rolling her eyes playfully. Oliver laughed again. Minutes passed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Then, in the distance, the low rumble of engines. Martha stiffened slightly. Annie's head turned toward the door. Oliver sat up straighter. The sound grew louder. Not one car. Several. Annie pulled the curtain back just a little more. Her eyes widened. "Grandma," Martha stepped beside her. Down the street, headlights approached in a line. Dark vehicles. Large ones. They moved with purpose. Slow but deliberate. Until they reached the front of the house. And stopped. The engines idled. Low and steady. No one inside the house spoke. Annie felt something shift in the air. Not fear exactly, but something close. Oliver stood up slowly from his chair, clutching his phone. "He's here," he said softly. Martha placed a gentle hand on Annie's shoulder. "Stay behind me," she murmured. Outside, one of the car doors opened. Then another. Footsteps approached the small wooden porch. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the door. Annie held her breath. The handle turned. The door opened slowly. Cold air slipped into the house, first sharp, quiet, carrying with it something heavier than just the night. Then the man stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. William Whitmore filled the doorway without saying a word. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark overcoat that looked untouched by the wind outside. Behind him, faint shadows of other men moved near the cars, but none of them entered. The house suddenly felt smaller. Oliver didn't hesitate. "Dad," the word broke the tension like glass. He ran forward, his small feet hitting the floor in quick, uneven steps. William dropped to one knee instantly, arms opening before the boy even reached him. The moment they collided, the man wrapped his son tightly against his chest. For a second, just a second, everything else disappeared. "I've got you," William whispered, his voice rough, almost unrecognizable from the controlled tone on the phone. "I've got you." Oliver clung to him. "I'm sorry," he mumbled into his father's coat. "I didn't mean to get lost." William shook his head, pressing his hand gently against the back of the boy's head. "No," he said. "No. You're okay. You're safe." Annie stood frozen near the table. She had never seen a grown man like that before. Not a rich man. Not someone who arrived with black cars and people waiting outside. Just a father. Martha watched quietly from behind Annie, her sharp eyes studying every movement. She had seen men like this before. Power didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walked in quietly, and everything adjusted around it. William slowly stood, still holding Oliver close. Only then did he seem to remember where he was. His eyes lifted. They landed on Martha first, then Annie. For a moment, no one spoke. Then William took a step forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady again, though something underneath it still trembled. "You're Martha Carter?" Martha nodded. "That's right." He adjusted Oliver slightly in his arms, then extended his free hand. "William Whitmore." Martha looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. She shook it. Her grip was firm. "Your boy's been safe here," she said. William nodded once. "I can see that." His gaze shifted to Annie. The little girl stood still, her hands folded in front of her, unsure what to do now that the moment had changed. William studied her quietly. Something in his expression softened. "You must be Annie," he said. She nodded. "Yes, sir." William glanced at Oliver. "Is she the one who helped you?" Oliver pulled back slightly, still in his father's arms. "She let me in," he said. And she gave me food and helped charge my phone. William looked back at Annie. There was no smile, but there was something deeper. Recognition. Respect. Thank you, he said simply. Annie shifted her weight slightly. I just opened the door, she replied. Martha crossed her arms lightly. That's more than some would do, she added. William didn't argue. He looked around the house then, not in judgment, in understanding. The old furniture, the patched walls, the quiet dignity of people who lived with little but carried themselves with enough. His eyes landed briefly on the pot of soup, then on the single pie near the window, then back to Martha. You fed him, he said. Martha shrugged. He was hungry. William exhaled slowly. A man like him was used to solving problems with money, with influence, with control. But this had been something else, something he couldn't command. He reached into his coat. Annie tensed slightly. Martha didn't move. William pulled out a thick envelope and placed it gently on the table. No drama, no flourish, just a quiet action. For your kindness, he said. Martha didn't even look at it. No, she replied immediately. William paused. It's not. I said no, Martha repeated, her voice calm but firm. We don't take money for helping a child. Silence settled in the room. Annie looked between them. Oliver looked up at his father. William studied Martha carefully. Most people didn't say no to him. Not like that. Not without hesitation. But there was no pride in her refusal. Only principle. He nodded slowly. I understand, he said, but he didn't take the envelope back. Instead, he rested his hand lightly on it. Then don't think of it as payment. Martha raised an eyebrow. Think of it as making things right, he continued. Because tonight, if you hadn't opened that door, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Martha's expression softened just slightly. Behind her, Annie stepped forward. Grandma, she said quietly. Martha glanced down at her. Annie looked back at William. He was really scared, she said. Then she looked at Oliver. He kept checking if his phone was charging. Oliver gave a small, embarrassed smile. Martha sighed. Long, tired, the kind of sigh that carried years of decisions. She looked at the envelope again, then at William. You said you're his father, she said. I am. Then raise him right. William didn't blink. I intend to. Martha nodded once. Then that's enough for me. William held her gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Then slowly, he picked up the envelope again. But instead of putting it away, he placed it back down. Closer this time. Not as an offer, as a promise. I don't forget things like this, he said quietly. Martha didn't respond, but she didn't push it away either. Oliver tugged lightly on his father's sleeve. Can Annie come visit sometime? He asked. The question caught everyone off guard. Annie blinked. Martha looked at William. William looked down at his son, then back at Annie. A faint smile touched his lips. We'll see, he said. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a beginning. William adjusted his coat. It's time to go, he said gently. Oliver nodded, though he looked back at Annie. Thank you, he said again. Annie smiled. You're not lost anymore. Oliver grinned. No. William turned toward the door, his presence filling the small house once more. Before stepping out, he paused. He looked back. At Annie, at Martha, at the house. Then he said quietly, kindness like this doesn't disappear. And then he was gone. The cold air slipped in again as the door closed behind him. The sound of engines returned, then faded. Silence settled back into the house. Annie stood still for a long moment. Then she looked up at her grandmother. Grandma. Martha walked slowly back to the table. She looked at the envelope. Didn't touch it. Not yet. Then she said softly, sometimes, child, one small decision follows you for the rest of your life. Annie didn't fully understand, but she felt it. Something had changed. Not just for the boy, not just for the man, but for them too. And neither of them knew yet how far that change would reach. The house felt different after the cars left. Quieter, not the peaceful kind of quiet Annie was used to, where the radio hummed softly and the smell of soup filled the air. This quiet felt heavier, like something had passed through and left its shadow behind. Annie stood near the door for a long moment, staring at the spot where Oliver had been. Then she slowly turned back. Grandma, do you think he's okay now? Martha didn't answer right away. She was still standing by the table, looking down at the envelope William had left behind. I think, she said finally, That boy was never in danger the way we thought. Annie frowned. But he was lost. Yes, Martha said. But not alone in the world. That was different. Annie walked back to the table and climbed into her chair. Her small fingers traced the edge of the wood. He was still scared, she said quietly. Martha looked at her. Yes, she agreed. And that part matters more than anything else. The old woman finally reached out and picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. She turned it over once in her hands, then set it back down. Annie watched her carefully. Aren't you going to open it? She asked. Martha shook her head. Not tonight. Why not? Martha leaned back in her chair, her joints creaking slightly. Because money has a way of changing how you feel about things, she said. And I want to remember tonight the way it really was. Annie tilted her head. The way it really was? Martha nodded. A boy knocked on our door, she said. He was cold, he was hungry, and we let him in. She looked at Annie. That's the part that matters. Annie thought about that. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The radio continued playing softly in the background. Outside, the street returned to its usual quiet rhythm. No more black cars, no more footsteps. Just the distant sound of wind and the occasional passing vehicle. Martha stood and began cleaning up the table. Annie hopped down to help, carrying the empty bowl to the sink with both hands. Careful now, Martha said. I got it, Annie replied. She set the bowl down with a small clink. Then she looked up. Grandma, do you think he'll come back? Martha paused, drying her hands with a worn dish towel. I don't know, she said honestly. But people don't forget kindness, she added after a moment. Annie smiled a little. I hope he does. Martha looked at her. You liked him? Annie shrugged, trying to act casual. He was nice. Then, after a small pause, and he said thank you. Martha smiled. That's a good sign. They finished cleaning in silence. When everything was done, Martha walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside just a little. The street was empty again, as if nothing had happened, but Martha knew better. She had lived long enough to recognize turning points, and tonight had been one. She let the curtain fall back into place. Time for bed, she said. Annie groaned softly. I'm not even tired. Martha raised an eyebrow. You will be in about 3 minutes. That made Annie giggle. She ran down the short hallway to her room. The room was small but cozy. A single bed, a shelf of books, a stuffed bear sitting neatly on the pillow. Annie climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Good night, Grandma, she called. Good night, baby, Martha replied from the kitchen. The lights went off one by one. The house settled into sleep, but Martha didn't go to bed right away. She walked back to the table. The envelope was still there, waiting. She stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, she sat down. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of it. Making things right, she murmured under her breath, repeating William's words. She had heard promises before. Some meant nothing. Some meant everything. Carefully, she opened the envelope. Inside was more money than she had expected. Far more. Her breath caught. For a moment, the room felt smaller, heavier, not because of fear, because of possibility. New roof, medical bills, food without counting every dollar. Martha closed her eyes briefly. Then she placed the money back inside and sealed the envelope again. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just sat there, thinking, money don't change who you are. She whispered softly. It just shows you who you've been all along. She stood up and walked to the small cabinet near the corner of the room. From inside, she pulled out an old tin box. It was worn, scratched from years of use. She placed the envelope inside, closed it, locked it, then set it back where it belonged. Out of sight, out of reach. For now. Martha turned off the last light in the kitchen. The house fell into darkness, but sleep didn't come easily. Later that night, long after Annie had drifted off, Martha lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, and thinking about the boy, about the man, about the way the cars had arrived, and the way they had left. There was power in that kind of silence, the kind that didn't need to explain itself. Martha turned onto her side. She had spent her whole life building something simple, honest, safe, and tonight, that world had been touched by something far bigger, far more complicated. Lord, she whispered softly into the darkness, keep that child safe. She wasn't sure which one she meant, maybe both. In the other room, Annie shifted slightly in her sleep. A faint smile crossed her face. In her dream, She saw Oliver sitting at the table again, eating soup, laughing, not scared anymore. And somewhere across the city, a man sat awake in a much larger house, watching his son sleep, thinking about a small wooden home, a warm kitchen, and a little girl who opened the door. Because sometimes, the smallest houses hold the biggest acts of courage, and sometimes, a single night is enough to change the direction of more than one life. Morning came slowly to the Carter house. The first light of day slipped through the thin curtains, painting soft golden lines across the worn wooden floor. The neighborhood outside stirred to life in its usual way, distant car engines, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the faint clatter of someone dragging a trash bin to the curb. Inside, everything felt almost normal again. Almost. Annie was the first to wake. She sat up in bed, her hair tousled, her small hands rubbing sleep from her eyes. For a brief moment, she forgot about the night before. Then she remembered. The knock, the boy, the cars. Her eyes widened slightly. Oliver, she whispered to herself. She climbed out of bed and padded down the hallway, her bare feet soft against the floor. Grandma? She called quietly. In the kitchen, baby. Annie walked in to find Martha already awake, standing by the stove. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, along with something else toast. You're up early, Martha said without turning. Annie climbed into her chair. I had a dream, she said. Martha glanced at her. About what? About Oliver, Annie answered. He came back, and we were eating pie again. Martha gave a small smile. That sounds like a good dream. Annie nodded. Do you think he remembers us? Martha didn't answer right away. She poured coffee into her chipped mug, then leaned lightly against the counter. People remember how you make them feel, she said. More than anything else. Annie seemed to think about that. Then, a sound outside. Different this time. Not quiet. Not distant. Heavy. Low. Engines. Martha's eyes lifted toward the window. Annie turned in her chair. Grandma? Martha didn't speak. She walked slowly to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. Then she froze. Annie slid off her chair and ran over. What is it? Martha stepped back slightly, letting Annie see. Outside, lining the street, black vehicles, more than the night before. Sleek. Polished. Out of place in a neighborhood where most cars had dents and faded paint. Men stepped out. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise, disciplined. Annie's eyes grew wide. Is that Oliver's dad again? Martha's voice was quiet. Yes. Before Annie could say anything else, knock. This time, it wasn't uncertain. It was firm, measured. Annie looked up at her grandmother. Martha straightened her shoulders. Stay behind me, she said. She walked to the door and opened it. William Whitmore stood there, but something was different. He wasn't frantic anymore. He wasn't searching. Today, he looked exactly like what he was. A man in control of everything around him. Behind him, two men in suits stood at a respectful distance. William stepped forward slightly. Good morning, Mrs. Carter. Martha met his gaze. Mr. Whitmore. Annie peeked from behind her grandmother. Hi, she said. William's expression softened immediately. Good morning, Annie. He paused, then glanced back toward the street. May I come in? Martha hesitated for only a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. William entered the house again, though this time he moved more slowly, more aware of the space, as if he understood now that this house operated on a different kind of value. Not power, not wealth, something quieter, something stronger. Annie watched him carefully. Where's Oliver? She asked. William's lips curved slightly. He's safe, he said. And he hasn't stopped talking about this place. Annie smiled. Really? William nodded. He asked me 3 times this morning if he could come back. Martha crossed her arms lightly. That so? William turned to her. Yes, ma'am. He reached into his coat again. But this time, it wasn't an envelope. It was a folder. He placed it gently on the table. Martha didn't touch it. What's this? She asked. William looked at her steadily. This is me keeping my word. Martha's expression didn't change. I didn't agree to anything. William nodded. I know. He opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents. Neat. Organized. Précis. I've arranged for repairs on this house, he said. Roof, plumbing, heating. Martha's eyes flickered just slightly. And medical coverage, he added. For you. That made her still. And a scholarship fund, he continued. glancing at Annie. For her education, silence filled the room. Annie looked between them. "Grandma, what's a scholarship?" Martha didn't answer. Her eyes remained locked on William. "Why?" she asked. William didn't hesitate. "Because last night, when my son needed help," he said, "you didn't ask who he was." He glanced at Annie. "You didn't ask what he could give you." Then back to Martha. "You just helped him." His voice lowered slightly. "Most people don't do that anymore." Martha studied him carefully. "And you think money makes that equal?" William shook his head. "No." He took a step back. "I think nothing makes it equal." That answer hung in the air. Annie looked at her grandmother. "Grandma, can we say yes?" Martha didn't respond immediately. Her eyes moved from William to the papers, to Annie. Then she sighed softly. Not tired, not defeated, just thoughtful. "You don't owe us anything," she said. William met her gaze. "I know, and this won't change who we are." "It shouldn't," he agreed. Martha nodded once, slowly. Then she reached out and placed her hand on the folder, not fully accepting, not fully refusing, just acknowledging. "That's as far as I go today," she said. William gave a small nod. "That's enough." Annie broke into a smile. "Does this mean Oliver can come visit?" William looked at her. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he smiled fully. "Yes," he said. "I think it does." Outside, the men waited. The cars remained still, but inside that small house, something shifted again, not because of money, not because of power, but because two worlds so far apart had found a way to meet in the middle. And this time, it wasn't just for one night. The house did not return to normal after that morning. Not completely. Something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, steady way that Annie could feel even if she couldn't explain it. For the next 2 days, the Carter home became a place of movement. Workers came and went. Not like the men in black suits, these were different. Older men with tool belts, paint-stained jeans, and voices that carried the easy rhythm of people who had spent years fixing things. They greeted Martha with respect. "Yes, ma'am." "Morning, ma'am." They didn't rush. They didn't treat the house like a project. They treated it like a home. Annie watched everything. From the doorway, from the window, from her usual spot at the table. "Grandma," she asked one afternoon, "are we rich now?" Martha didn't even look up from the vegetables she was chopping. "No." Annie frowned. "But we have all these people fixing stuff." Martha paused, then set the knife down carefully. She turned to Annie. "Money can fix a house," she said. "But it don't decide who you are." Annie thought about that, then nodded slowly. "Okay." Outside, the sound of hammering echoed lightly as someone worked on the roof. Inside, the kitchen felt warmer than it had in years. The heater had been repaired, the windows sealed. Even the old cabinet door no longer creaked when opened. But Martha kept everything else the same. Same table, same chairs, same radio, because some things didn't need fixing. That afternoon, Annie sat by the window, swinging her legs back and forth. She kept looking toward the street, waiting. Martha noticed. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor if you keep pacing like that," she said. "I'm not pacing," Annie replied. "You're waiting." Annie didn't deny it. "Do you think he's coming today?" she asked. Martha wiped her hands on a towel. "He said he would." Annie leaned her chin on the windowsill. "What if he forgets?" Martha gave a small smile. "People like that don't forget appointments." Annie turned. "What do you mean, people like that?" Martha paused, then said carefully, "People who carry responsibility." Annie didn't fully understand, but she felt the weight of it. Time passed slowly. The sun dipped lower. The street grew quieter. Then, the sound, not loud, but familiar. Annie jumped up. "They're here." Martha didn't rush. She walked to the window and looked out. A single black SUV this time. Not a line, not a show of power, just one. "That's different," she murmured. The car door opened, and out stepped Oliver. Before anyone could say a word, he was already running. "Annie." She ran to the door and flung it open. "Oliver." They met halfway on the porch. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just two children who had already decided they liked each other. "You came back," Annie said. "I told you I would," Oliver replied. Behind him, William stepped out of the car. No entourage this time, no extra movement, just him. He walked toward the porch at a measured pace. Martha opened the door wider. "Afternoon," she said. "Mrs. Carter." William replied with a nod. Oliver didn't wait. Can I come in? He asked. Annie grabbed his hand. Of course you can. Martha stepped aside. Shoes off, she said automatically. Oliver stopped, slipped them off neatly, and placed them by the door. Good manners again, Martha noticed. Inside, the house felt brighter, not because of the repairs, because of the laughter. Oliver walked straight to the kitchen table like he had been there 100 times before. This is where we ate, he said. Annie nodded proudly. Yeah, and today we have cookies. Oliver's eyes lit up. Really? Martha shook her head with a faint smile. You two sit, she said. I'll bring them out. William remained near the doorway for a moment, watching, observing. Something in his posture softened again, less guarded, less distant. He stepped further inside. It looks different already, he said quietly. Martha didn't turn. Still the same house, she replied. William nodded. Yes, he said. I can see that. At the table, Annie and Oliver were already talking over each other. You should see my room. I brought my tablet. We can draw. I don't draw very good. That's okay. I'll teach you. Their voices filled the space. Easy, natural, unforced. Martha set a plate of cookies on the table. Slow down, she said. You'll trip over your own words. They both laughed. William leaned lightly against the wall. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, Oliver, he called. The boy looked up. Yes? William hesitated, just slightly, then asked, Are you all right? It was a simple question, but not the kind he usually asked. Oliver smiled. I'm better here. The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. William didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded. Martha watched him, carefully. She saw it now. Not just power, not just control, but something else. A man trying to understand something he couldn't buy. She spoke, almost casually. Children don't lie about where they feel safe. William looked at her. Their eyes met, and for the first time, he didn't have an answer. At the table, Annie broke a cookie in half and handed it to Oliver. Here, she said. This one's bigger. Oliver shook his head. You take it. Annie pushed it to him anyway. No, you were the guest first. Oliver smiled. Then we share. They split it evenly. Martha nodded to herself. There it was. The lesson. Not taught. Not forced. Just lived. William saw it too. And something in his expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because in that moment, in that small kitchen, with two children sharing a cookie, he understood something that had nothing to do with wealth, and everything to do with worth. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Inside, the light stayed warm. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't just feel safe. It felt full. That afternoon stretched longer than any Annie could remember. Not because of waiting, but because she didn't want it to end. Oliver had taken over the small living room as if it had always belonged to him. His shoes sat neatly by the door, his laughter bouncing off the walls in a way that made the house feel younger somehow. Look, Annie said, pulling out a small box from under the couch. These are my crayons. Oliver leaned closer, his eyes lighting up. You have so many colors. They're not new, Annie said quickly. Some of them are really short. That's okay, Oliver replied. Short ones still work. He picked up a blue crayon and began drawing on a piece of paper Annie had placed between them. What are you making? She asked. A house, he said. Annie smiled. That's easy. Oliver shook his head. No, not just a house. He paused, concentrating. A safe house. Annie tilted her head. What's that? Oliver didn't look up. It's a place where you don't feel scared. The words were simple, but they landed differently. Annie glanced toward the kitchen. Martha was watching them, quietly, understanding more than either child realized. Across the room, William remained near the wall, arms loosely folded. He hadn't moved much since arriving, but his presence no longer filled the space the way it had before. Now, he observed, listened, learned. Annie scooted closer to Oliver. You can draw this one, she said, pointing to the paper. That's our house. Oliver looked up. Yeah, he said softly. It is, in the kitchen. Martha poured 2 glasses of milk and carried them over. Break time, she announced. Annie groaned playfully. We just started. That's why it's called a break, Martha replied. Oliver took the glass carefully. Thank you, ma'am. Martha nodded. You're welcome, child. William watched that exchange closely. Respect. Natural. Unforced. He stepped forward slightly. "Oliver," he said. The boy looked up. "Yes, Dad?" William hesitated for just a moment. Then, "What did you learn today?" It wasn't a question he usually asked. "Not like this." Oliver thought for a second, then said, "That you don't have to be home to feel at home." Silence followed. Annie looked at him. Martha stilled, and William didn't move at all. The sentence hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. Martha broke the silence first. "Children say the truth plain," she said softly. William's gaze shifted to her. "Yes," he replied. "They do." He looked back at Oliver, then at Annie. Two children, sharing crayons, sharing cookies, sharing something he had spent years trying to build with far more complicated tools. Trust. He exhaled slowly. "Oliver," he said again, his tone gentler now. "Why did you run so far yesterday?" Oliver looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I just wanted to play longer." William stepped closer. "And why didn't you stay where you were supposed to?" Oliver shrugged slightly. "Because nobody was playing with me." The answer came out quiet, but it hit harder than anything else. William's jaw tightened, not in anger. In realization, Annie leaned forward. "I would have played with you," she said immediately. Oliver smiled. "I know." Martha watched William carefully. There it was again. That moment, the one where a man sees something he didn't want to admit. She spoke gently, but clearly. "Children don't need much," she said. "Just time, and someone who sees them." William nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that." Annie suddenly stood up. "Come on," she said, grabbing Oliver's hand. "Let me show you my room." They ran down the hallway together, their laughter trailing behind them. The house fell quieter again, but not empty. William remained standing in the living room. Martha returned to the kitchen, rinsing the glasses slowly. After a moment, William spoke. "You were right," he said. Martha didn't turn. "About what?" "About raising him right." She paused, then continued washing. "That's your job," she said. "Not mine." William walked a few steps closer. "I thought providing everything he needed was enough." Martha dried her hands and turned to face him. "That's not the same thing." William met her gaze. "What is?" Martha's expression softened slightly. "Being there when it matters." The words were simple, but they carried weight. William looked down briefly, then back up. "I've spent my whole life building something," he said. "And I think I may have missed something else in the process." Martha nodded once. "Happens more often than you think." From down the hall, Annie's voice echoed. "Oliver, don't touch that, it's broken." A pause. Then both children burst into laughter. William's lips curved slightly. "That sounds like something I can't buy," he said. Martha allowed herself a faint smile. "No, sir," she replied. "That's something you earn." He looked at her again, and this time, he didn't argue, because deep down, he knew she was right. Moments later, the children returned, slightly out of breath, still smiling. "Can he stay longer?" Annie asked immediately. William checked his watch, then looked at Oliver, then back at Annie. "Yes," he said. "He can stay a little longer." Annie cheered. Oliver grinned. Martha shook her head lightly. "Just don't run through the house," she warned. "No promises," Annie replied, already pulling Oliver back toward the living room. Their footsteps echoed again, light, carefree, alive. William stood there, watching them, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to control the moment. He just let it happen, because sometimes, the most important things in life don't need to be managed, they just need to be noticed. And finally, he was paying attention. The sun had begun to dip lower, stretching long shadows across the Carter house, when the energy inside finally started to slow. Not because the children wanted it to, but because even joy, when it runs fast enough, eventually needs to catch its breath. Annie and Oliver sat on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered crayons and wrinkled sheets of paper. Their drawings had grown more elaborate houses with gardens, stick figures holding hands, a sun that seemed too big for the page. "This one is you," Annie said, pointing at a drawing with two figures standing beside a small house. "And this is me." Oliver studied it carefully. "And that's your grandma?" he asked. "Yeah," Annie said. "She's always watching." Oliver nodded slowly. "That's good," he said. "Why?" He shrugged. "So nobody gets lost." Annie didn't answer right away. She just looked at the drawing again. Across the room, William checked his watch, though this time it wasn't out of urgency. It was habit. A lifetime of schedules and structure still lingered in him. Even here, Martha noticed. "You've got somewhere to be?" she asked. William shook his head. "Not as important as this," he replied. That answer seemed to settle something quietly between them. Martha nodded once, then moved toward the stove, where she had begun preparing a simple early dinner. "You'll both eat before you go," she said over her shoulder. William opened his mouth to object, then paused, then closed it again. "Yes, ma'am," he said. In the living room, Annie perked up. "Dinner?" Oliver looked surprised. "We can stay?" Annie grinned. "Of course you can." Oliver looked toward his father. William gave a small nod. "We'll stay." The word felt unfamiliar on his tongue, but not unwelcome. The kitchen soon filled with the warm scent of food, again simple, honest cooking that carried something deeper than flavor. Martha moved with quiet efficiency. Annie hovered nearby. "Can I help?" she asked. "You can set the table," Martha replied. "I'll do it," Annie said, rushing to grab plates. Oliver followed her. "I'll help too." "Okay," Annie said. "You do the forks." "I know how to do forks," Oliver replied with mock seriousness. "I hope so," Annie said. "It's not that hard." William watched them from a distance. Two children. No hesitation. No calculation. Just instinct. He stepped closer to Martha. "You don't have to do all this," he said quietly. Martha didn't look up. "I know," she replied. "Then why do it?" She stirred the pot once more, then turned slightly. "Because feeding people is how you show them they matter." William absorbed that. No transaction, no expectation, just meaning. At the table, Annie carefully placed each plate. "Grandma says the plate goes here," she explained to Oliver, "and the fork goes on this side." Oliver followed along. "What about the spoon?" "That depends," Annie said. "Are you eating soup?" Oliver thought about it. "I don't know." "Then we'll put one just in case," Annie decided. Martha smiled to herself. Preparedness. A small thing, but it said a lot. Soon, the four of them sat at the table. The same place where everything had begun. But now, it felt fuller. William hesitated before sitting. He wasn't used to this. Not like this, but when he did, something shifted again. Not outside. Inside. Martha placed the food in the center. "Help yourselves," she said. Annie reached first. Oliver followed. William waited a second, then served himself. No one rushed him. No one watched him. And somehow, that made it easier. For a while, they ate in quiet comfort. The kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then Annie spoke. "Oliver, do you eat like this at home?" Oliver shook his head. "No." "What do you eat?" "Different stuff." "Like what?" Oliver glanced at his father. William answered instead. "Whatever he wants." Annie frowned slightly. "That sounds confusing." Oliver nodded. "Sometimes it is." Martha set her fork down. "That's because choice without guidance don't help a child," she said. William looked at her. "I thought giving him everything was the best way." Martha shook her head. "Children don't need everything." She gestured toward Annie. "They need enough." The words settled quietly. Annie didn't fully understand them, but Oliver did. He looked down at his plate, then at Annie, then at his father. William leaned back slightly. A man who had built empires, now listening at a small kitchen table, learning. After a moment, Oliver spoke. "Dad?" William looked at him. "Yes." "Can Annie come to our house next time?" The question came so naturally, so simply. William didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew what that meant. Two worlds crossing further, not just meeting, blending. He looked at Martha, then at Annie, then back at Oliver. "Yes," he said. "She can." Annie's eyes lit up. "Really?" William nodded. "If your grandmother agrees." All eyes turned to Martha. She took her time, then said, "We'll see." Annie groaned. "That means maybe." Martha raised an eyebrow. "That means we think first." Oliver smiled. "That's fair." Dinner continued. Slower now, more thoughtful, and as the last light of day faded outside, something quiet but powerful settled inside that house. Not just connection, not just gratitude, but the beginning of something deeper. Trust, not built in a moment, but started in one. And as William sat there, listening to the soft voices around him, watching his son laugh in a place he had never known before, he realized something he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, He wasn't thinking about what came next. He was simply present. And sometimes, that is where everything truly begins. That night lingered long after the plates were cleared, not because anything dramatic happened, but because something quiet had taken root. After dinner, Annie insisted on showing Oliver one last thing before he left. "Come on," she said, grabbing his hand again. "I didn't show you the best part yet." "What is it?" Oliver asked, already being pulled down the hallway. "You'll see." Their voices faded into Annie's small bedroom. William stood from the table slowly, almost reluctantly, as if leaving his seat meant leaving something behind. Martha gathered the plates. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied simply. She carried the dishes to the sink. Water ran. The familiar rhythm of rinsing, stacking, placing. William remained where he was for a moment. Then he stepped closer. "This isn't something I'm used to," he admitted. Martha didn't look up. "Which part?" "All of it." She nodded slightly. "That's probably why it matters." He considered that. From down the hall, Annie's voice rose again. "This is my favorite book." Oliver responded, "It's small. That's because it's special." William glanced toward the hallway. "They're comfortable here," he said. Martha turned off the water. "Yes, that doesn't happen easily," he added. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." He hesitated, then asked, "How do you do that?" Martha dried her hands slowly before answering. "You don't make people feel comfortable," she said. "You make space and let them decide." William absorbed the words carefully. Space, not control, not direction, something he had rarely practiced. In Annie's room, Oliver sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a small, worn book in his hands. "What's this about?" he asked. Annie sat across from him. "It's about a girl who gets lost," she said. Oliver looked up. "Like me?" Annie smiled. "Yeah, but she finds her way back." "How?" "She meets someone kind." Oliver looked down at the book again, then said quietly, "That sounds like you." Annie shrugged. "I just opened the door." Oliver shook his head. "That's not just." The room fell quiet for a moment. Then Annie leaned forward. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked. Oliver didn't answer right away. He picked at the corner of the book. "Sometimes," he said. "When?" "When it's quiet," he replied. Annie frowned. "I like quiet." Oliver nodded. "Me too. But not that kind." "What kind?" "The kind where nobody comes." Annie didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, thinking. Then she said, "You can come here." Simple. Direct. Certain. Oliver looked at her. "Really?" Annie nodded. "As long as the light's on." That made him smile. In the living room, William checked his watch again. This time, it wasn't habit. It was reality. "We should go," he said gently. Martha nodded. "Children need rest." Annie and Oliver returned a moment later. "Already?" Annie asked. William gave her an apologetic look. "Already." Oliver didn't argue, but his shoulders dropped slightly. Annie noticed. "It's okay," she said quickly. "You can come back." Oliver nodded. "I will." They walked toward the door together. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a quiet understanding that something had been built. Shoes went on, jackets adjusted. The night air waited outside. Oliver turned to Annie. "Thank you," he said again. Annie smiled. "You already said that." "I know," he replied. "But I mean it again." She nodded. "I know." William stood by the door, watching the exchange. Then he looked at Martha. "You've given him something I didn't know how to," he said. Martha shook her head. "No," she replied. "He already had it." William frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Children are born knowing how to connect," she said. "It's the world that teaches them to forget." William didn't respond immediately, because he understood exactly what she meant. He had seen it happen. Slowly. Over time, he opened the door. Cold air slipped in again, but it didn't feel as harsh this time. Oliver stepped outside, then turned back once more. "Bye, Annie." "Bye, Oliver." William followed. Before leaving, he paused. He looked at Martha, then at Annie, then back at the house. "I meant what I said," he told Martha quietly. "I don't forget things like this." Martha nodded. "I know." William gave a small nod in return, then stepped out. The door closed. Engines started, and just like that, they were gone again, but this time, it felt different. Annie stood by the door for a long moment, then turned. "Grandma." Martha was already walking back toward the table. Yes, baby? Do you think he'll really come back? Martha smiled softly. Yes. How do you know? Martha glanced at the window, where the faint glow of taillights disappeared into the distance. Because he doesn't want to feel lost anymore. Annie nodded slowly. That made sense. She walked back to her room, climbed into bed, and held the small book Oliver had touched. In the quiet of the night, she whispered, as long as the light's on. Across the city, in a house far bigger and far quieter, Oliver sat in the back seat of the car, looking out the window. Dad? William glanced at him. Yes? Can we keep going back there? William didn't answer right away. He looked out at the passing streets, then back at his son. Yes, he said. We can. Oliver leaned back, satisfied. For the first time since getting lost, he didn't feel like he had to search for something, because he knew where it was. And sometimes, finding your way isn't about the road you take. It's about the door that was opened for you. The city looked different from inside the car that night, not because the streets had changed, but because Oliver had. He sat quietly in the back seat, his small hands resting in his lap, no longer gripping the door handle the way he had earlier. The fear that once filled his chest had settled into something softer, something steadier. Across from him, William watched, not directly, but carefully. Parents learn to do that, observe without making it obvious. You're quiet, William said after a while. Oliver didn't look away from the window. I'm thinking. About what? Oliver hesitated, then said, that house. William nodded slowly. What about it? Oliver turned his head slightly. It feels different there. William leaned back. How? Oliver searched for the right words. It's small, he said. But it doesn't feel small. William almost smiled. That's because size doesn't decide how something feels. Oliver nodded. I think I like it more than our house. The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. William didn't respond immediately, because he understood what his son meant. Their house, his house, was large, perfectly designed, controlled, secure, but it wasn't warm in the same way. Do you know why? William asked. Oliver shook his head. Because someone is always there, he said. Not just people, but someone who sees you. Oliver leaned back into the seat. Annie sees me. William looked out the window. The city lights blurred slightly as the car moved forward. Yes, he said quietly. She does. When they arrived home, the gates opened automatically. The long driveway stretched ahead, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and soft ground lighting. The house stood at the end, large, impressive, silent. The car came to a stop. The driver stepped out first. William opened Oliver's door. We're home, he said. Oliver stepped out, but he didn't move forward right away. He looked at the house, then back at his father. Dad. Yes? Can Annie come here soon? William paused, then nodded. She can. Oliver smiled. That was enough. Inside, the house was just as it had always been. Clean, orderly, quiet. A housekeeper greeted them briefly. Good evening, sir. William nodded. Everything all right? Yes, sir. Oliver walked ahead slowly. His footsteps echoed slightly against the polished floor. No crayons on the ground. No laughter. No smell of soup. Just space. Too much space. William watched him. Oliver, he called. The boy stopped. Yes, come sit with me for a moment. They moved into the living room. Large windows, modern furniture, perfectly arranged. William sat. Oliver climbed onto the couch beside him. There was a pause. Then William spoke. Did you have a good time today? Oliver nodded. Yeah. What was your favorite part? Oliver thought, then said, when Annie shared her cookie. William raised an eyebrow slightly. Not the drawings? Not the games? Oliver shook his head. No. Why the cookie? Oliver smiled faintly. Because she didn't have to. William leaned back slightly. There it was again. That lesson. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Oliver, he said gently. Do you know what it means to share something when you don't have much? Oliver looked at him. It means you care. William nodded slowly. Yes. The words stayed between them. Care, not provision, not control. Car. William stood after a moment. Let's get you ready for bed. Oliver didn't argue. He followed, up the stairs, down the long hallway, into a bedroom larger than Annie's entire home. Everything was in place. Everything was perfect, but something was missing. Oliver climbed into bed. William pulled the blanket over him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Oliver spoke softly. Dad? Yes? Were you scared? William didn't expect that. When I was lost. William exhaled slowly. Yes, he said. Oliver looked at him. I was scared too. I know? Oliver hesitated, then said, but I wasn't scared when I got there. William nodded. I know that too. Oliver yawned slightly. Can we go back tomorrow? William smiled faintly. Not tomorrow. Oliver frowned. Why? Because some things are better when you don't rush them. Oliver thought about that, then nodded. Okay. William turned off the light, but before he could step away, Oliver reached out and grabbed his hand. Stay a little, he said. William paused, then sat back down. All right. Minutes passed. Quiet. Still. Oliver's breathing slowed, then steadied. Sleep came, but William didn't move. He sat there, looking at his son, thinking about a small house, a simple meal, a girl who opened the door without asking questions, and a woman who refused money before accepting respect. After a while, he gently pulled his hand free, stood, and walked out, but he didn't go to his office. He didn't check his phone. Instead, he walked to the window at the end of the hallway, looked out over the city, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about expansion, or profit, or control. He was thinking about something far more difficult. Change. Because deep down, he knew, you can build the biggest house in the world, but if no one feels seen inside it, it's just walls. And somewhere, in a smaller house across the city, a light was still on, and that meant everything. The next morning didn't feel the same, not in the Carter house, and not in William Whitmore's, but for very different reasons. Annie woke up before the sun had fully risen. She sat up in bed, hugging her blanket, staring at the small window where the early light barely touched the edge of the frame. For a moment, she listened. The house was quiet, peaceful, familiar, but something inside her felt restless. She slipped out of bed and walked down the hallway. Grandma? In here. Martha's voice came softly from the kitchen. Annie stepped in. Martha was already seated at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her, the radio playing low as usual. But she wasn't moving, just sitting, thinking. You're up early, Martha said. So are you, Annie replied. Martha gave a faint smile. Old habits. Annie climbed into her chair. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Annie said, I miss him. Martha didn't look surprised. Already? Annie nodded. He makes the house louder. Martha chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. Annie traced circles on the table with her finger. Do you think he misses me too? Martha looked at her. Yes. How do you know? Martha took a sip of her coffee. Because children don't pretend about that. Annie seemed satisfied with that answer, but Martha could see something else behind it. A shift. Small, but real. Attachment. Care. The kind that changes how you see the world. Outside, the morning carried on. Neighbors leaving for work. A car starting down the street. A dog barking in the distance. Life. Normal, but not quite the same. Across the city, William stood in his office. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's skyline, sharp and endless in the morning light. His desk was covered with files, contracts, reports, important things, urgent things, but he hadn't touched any of them. Instead, he stood still, thinking. A knock came at the door. Come in. A man in a dark suit stepped inside. Sir, your 9 meeting is ready. William didn't turn. Reschedule it. The man hesitated. Sir. It's the board. I said reschedule it. The tone wasn't loud, but it didn't allow for argument. Yes, sir. The man stepped out quickly. The door closed. Silence returned. William exhaled slowly, then turned, and walked out of the office, not toward the conference room, but toward the hallway that led upstairs. To Oliver. He knocked lightly. Come in, a small voice answered. William opened the door. Oliver was sitting on the floor, not playing, just sitting. What are you doing? William asked. Oliver shrugged. Nothing. That answer hit harder than it should have. William stepped inside. You have your toys, he said. Your books. Oliver nodded. I know. Then why aren't you playing? Oliver looked up. Because it's not fun by myself. There it was. Clear. Unfiltered. William walked further into the room. And yesterday? He asked. Oliver's face changed immediately. That was fun. Why? Oliver didn't hesitate. Because Annie was there. William nodded slowly. And what made it different? Oliver thought for a moment, then said, "She listens." William sat down across from him. "So do I." Oliver shook his head. "You hear me," he said. "Annie listens." The distinction landed like a quiet truth. William didn't argue, because he understood there was a difference, and he had missed it. He leaned forward slightly. "What would you like to do today?" Oliver looked at him. "Can we go back?" William paused, then asked, "Why is that so important to you?" Oliver answered softly, "Because I don't feel alone there." Silence. Heavy. Honest. William looked at his son. Really looked. Not as someone to protect, not as someone to provide for, but as someone trying to tell him something, and for the first time, he truly heard it. "Get dressed," William said. Oliver blinked. "Why?" "Because we're going somewhere." Oliver's eyes widened. "Are we going back?" William stood. "Yes." Oliver jumped up instantly. "I'll be ready." As the boy ran toward his closet, energy returning to his steps, William remained still for a moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Some lessons don't come from success." He looked toward the door. "They come from being shown what you missed." Back in the Carter house, Annie sat at the table, swinging her legs again. "You're thinking," Martha said. "I always think," Annie replied. Martha smiled. "That's true." Annie looked toward the window. "Do you think today feels different?" Martha followed her gaze. "Yes." "Why?" Martha thought for a moment, then said, "Because yesterday changed something." Annie tilted her head. "Like what?" Martha looked at her. "Like what you expect from people." Annie didn't fully understand, but she felt it. Then, a sound. Familiar. Low. Steady. Annie's head snapped toward the door. "Grandma." Martha didn't move. She just listened. The engine stopped outside. Annie ran to the window. Her face lit up instantly. "They're here." Martha stood slowly. No surprise this time. Just quiet acknowledgement. "Go on," she said. Annie didn't wait. She ran to the door and pulled it open. And there he was. Oliver. Standing on the porch. Not lost. Not afraid. Just back. And behind him, William Whitmore. But this time, he wasn't just a man arriving. He was a man returning. Because sometimes, you don't go back to a place because you have to. You go back because something there changed you. The door opened before Oliver could knock. "Oliver!" Annie's voice burst out of her before she could stop it. She ran forward, her small feet barely touching the wooden floor, and threw the door wide open. Oliver smiled the moment he saw her. "I came back," he said, almost as if he had been holding those words in all morning. "I knew you would," Annie replied. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty, just recognition. Behind him, William stood on the porch, quieter than before. The wind moved gently through his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. His attention was on the two children in front of him, on what they had found so easily, something he was still learning to understand. Martha stepped up behind Annie. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," William replied. There was no tension in his voice now, no distance, just respect. "May we?" he asked. Martha nodded and stepped aside. "You know the way." Oliver walked in like he belonged there, because in a way, he did. Annie closed the door behind them, already talking. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "Me too," Oliver answered. "What were you thinking?" "That I didn't want to feel alone again." Annie stopped for a second. Then she smiled. "You won't hear." The words were simple, but they carried something bigger. In the kitchen, the morning light stretched across the table, the same table where everything had begun. Martha poured 2 glasses of milk without asking. Some things didn't need to be discussed anymore. William remained standing for a moment, taking it all in again. The house hadn't changed, not really, but he had, and that made everything look different. "Sit," Martha said, nodding toward the chair. William did, not as a guest, not as a man used to being served, but as someone who understood he was being welcomed. At the table, Annie and Oliver were already leaning over a piece of paper. "What are we drawing today?" Annie asked. Oliver thought for a moment. "Something bigger," he said. "Bigger than a house?" Oliver nodded. "Yeah." He picked up a crayon and began to draw slowly, carefully. Annie watched. "What is it?" Oliver didn't look up. "A place where nobody gets left out." Annie smiled. "I like that." Across the table, William's eyes followed the movement of the crayon, the shape forming on the page. Not perfect, not detailed, but meaningful. Martha noticed his expression. Children build things different, she said. William nodded. They build what they need. Martha gave a small, approving glance. Now you're learning. William exhaled softly. Yes, he said. I think I am. There was a pause. Then he turned slightly toward her. I've made a lot of decisions in my life, he said. Big ones. Important ones. Martha listened, but none of them felt like this. He continued. Like what? William looked toward the children. Like something that matters without needing to prove it. Martha leaned back slightly. That's because it's real. No argument. No hesitation. Just truth. At the table, Oliver pushed the paper toward Annie. We should add you here, he said. Why me? Because you open doors. Annie giggled. That's not a job. Oliver shook his head. It is. She picked up a crayon and added a small figure next to his drawing. There, she said. Oliver nodded. Now it's right. William watched them quietly. Then he spoke. Annie. She looked up. Yes? He hesitated. Just slightly. Then said, Would you like to visit our home sometime? Annie blinked. Your house? He nodded. With your grandmother. Annie turned immediately. Grandma? Martha didn't answer right away. She looked at William, studied him. Not his clothes, not his status, but his intent. You asking, she said slowly, or you offering? William met her gaze. I'm inviting, he said. Martha nodded once. Then we'll consider it. Annie smiled. That means maybe, she whispered to Oliver. Oliver grinned. That's better than no. Laughter filled the room again. Easy, natural, earned. Time passed without anyone noticing. The sun climbed higher. The house warmed, and something settled into place. Not temporary, not fragile, but steady. After a while, William stood, not because he wanted to leave, but because he understood something important. Moments like this didn't need to be controlled. They needed to be respected. We should head back soon, he said. Oliver looked up. Do we have to? William smiled. Yes. Oliver sighed, but not the way he had before. Not heavy, not disappointed, just understanding. Okay. He turned to Annie. I'll come back again. Annie nodded. I'll keep the light on. Oliver smiled. I know. They walked to the door together. No rush, no fear, just connection. At the threshold, William paused. He looked at Martha, then Annie, then the house. This place, he said quietly, changed something in my son. He hesitated, then added, and in me. Martha nodded. That's what a good home does. William took that in, then said something softer, almost like a promise. I won't let him forget this. Martha replied gently, just don't let yourself forget either. William gave a small nod, then stepped outside. Oliver followed. The door closed, but not like before. Not like something ending, like something continuing. Annie stood there for a moment, then turned back. Grandma. Martha was already sitting at the table again. Yes, baby? Annie walked over. Did we do something big? Martha smiled. No. Annie frowned. It feels big. Martha reached out and gently took her hand. That's because sometimes the biggest things, she squeezed her hand softly, are the simplest ones. Annie looked down at the drawing still on the table. A place, a house, people standing together, no one left out. She smiled, and somewhere deep inside, she understood, because sometimes it doesn't take power, or money, or status, to change a life. Sometimes it just takes a door, a little light, and someone willing to say, come in. This story reminds us that true kindness does not come from wealth, power, or status. It comes from the heart. Annie had nothing but a warm home and a caring spirit. Yet her simple act of opening the door changed the life of a lost child and awakened something deeper in a powerful man. In a world where people often measure value by money, this story teaches that what truly matters is presence, empathy, and the courage to care for others. Sometimes, the smallest gesture offering warmth, food, or simply being there can become the light that guides someone out of darkness. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.